ahead, to you and Tyler. I'm not saying they have lied, and I'm not saying they haven't lied. I don't know. I have no reason to disbelieve your clients or to believe them. Just because somebody tells you the sky is blue does not mean the sky is blue. You do know that, right?
Well, I can tell you this: they were off Horn Island at 4:30 p.m. on July 4th, and Nolan Wells was seen alive.
Now we're getting somewhere. How can you prove that to me other than them telling you?
The friends are on a PR, PR blitz to change public opinion because they believe that they, in the court of public opinion, they're not doing so well, that they have been, sort of demeaned in some way, disparaged in some way.
I think it's weird. I think it's weird.
Yeah.
When Warren sat down with the guy, I know we don't like to say his name, sat down with him, I was like, okay, this one kid and his mom is a judge, and maybe he wants to sort of clear his name. But now every week, another friend sits down, or another friend sits down, and now they've got this lawyer, and they're sitting down and doing interviews. It's weird to me. And it's not just weird. People are going to say things on the internet. Why does that rise to the level of you need an attorney to now sit down and do interviews to publicize yourself, to try and change the court of public opinion? Why do you care about a court of public opinion? Because you didn't do anything. And ultimately, if you didn't do anything, and maybe they didn't, let's take them at their word, and their attorney, that they didn't have anything to do with Nolan's death. That's all going to come out when the results of the autopsy come out, when the investigation comes out. So why are you now getting? It's almost like I get like this attorney has probably convinced them, yes, do this and talk about this, and it'll change public opinion. But what it really does, it makes some people will look at it and go like, well, what are you getting out in front of?
But other than that, I feel like his mom blasting us on social media from the get-go, saying that he was out there with Warren and another guy. And then also the fact that she posted a picture of me and Morgan and another guy and Nolan on the boat together, blasting that out there, pushing this narrative, kind of, I guess.
Wait a minute. Let me get this straight. The mother is trying to find her son. She sends out a picture because you guys were together. Am I missing something? I'm confused. Y'all were together with him. He was on a boat with you guys. You're mad she put out the picture to the public?
Then as viral or gone all over the country at this point. I mean, this is a countrywide news story that is just blown out of proportion. And the fact that it was our best friend and it's not
something a lot of people are pointing out is Warren and how much his face has changed since just the first interview a few weeks ago to right now. And it begs the question, like, he looks like he has Ozempic face, in my opinion, but is something eating away at him? Now, obviously, this has to be very stressful, all of a sudden becoming this unwanted celebrity. He talks about where he went into a restaurant and was threatened and whatnot, but this doesn't look like weight loss by a man who lost his best friend and he just hasn't slept or hasn't eaten and is just doing everything he can to figure out what happened to his friend. It looks like something is literally eating away at his soul. That's all I'm saying. It's just my opinion. What do you guys think about it? Let me know in the comments.
Even TMZ stopped playing along this week. For weeks, TMZ has been one of the friendliest platforms this friend group has had. This week, on air, a TMZ host called their nonstop stream of interviews weird and asked the question a lot of people have been asking quietly for a while. If you didn't do anything, what exactly are you trying to get ahead of? That shift happened the same week one of the friends, sitting for an interview, criticized Nolan's own mother for releasing a photo of him to the public. We're going to play that moment in full, because however you land on it, it's a genuinely uncomfortable thing to hear from someone who spent the same interview calling Nolan a brother. And we're going to spend real time on the specific claim this entire defense has been resting on for weeks. That two witnesses saw Nolan alive on the island around 6 p.m., a full 90 minutes after the friends say they'd already left. Nancy Grace didn't just accept that timeline. She asked the questions a defense attorney would actually have to answer in a courtroom, and tonight we're going to walk through 3 of those questions that still don't have real answers. Who these witnesses actually are, whether their accounts were compared before they ever spoke to investigators, and whether the photo being used to support the timeline even has a verifiable timestamp. We're also going to hold this friend group's own account up against itself, because in their newest interview, several details don't quite match what's been said before, and we're not going to let that slide past just because it's uncomfortable to point out. This is everything worth taking seriously tonight, nothing else.
Ed, to you and Tyler, I'm not saying they have lied, and I'm not saying they haven't lied. I don't know. I have no reason to disbelieve your clients or to believe them. Just because somebody tells you the sky is blue does not mean the sky is blue. You do know that, right?
Well, I can tell you this: they were off Horn Island at 4:30 p.m. on July 4th, and Nolan Wells was seen alive.
Now we're getting somewhere. How can you prove that to me other than them telling you? I assume you've got GPS tracking and the call to CETO?
We have witnesses, among other things, but I can also tell you this: they were off the island at 4:30 p.m., and Nolan Wells was seen alive by multiple people at 6 p.m., still on the island.
Tyler,
Yes.
the witnesses that came forward, here's something that would tend to corroborate them, is if multiple witnesses said the same thing. Witnesses separated in time and space, witnesses that are not all friends, witnesses that are not good friends with your clients, that may have a reason to be fuzzy on the time. I'm not saying they are or that they're not. Here's my question to you. Are these witnesses friends of your clients?
I don't think they're friends, and they're not even the same age.
Okay. Next question. How many witnesses place him there on the island at 6-ish?
At least 2 that I know.
2. Do the witnesses know each other?
Yes.
Were they together that day?
Yes.
This is where the defense stops sounding simple. For weeks, the friend group's strongest answer has been the same. 2 witnesses say they saw Nolan alive on Horn Island around 6 p.m., roughly 90 minutes after Warren's group says they had already left. Their attorneys have leaned heavily on that timeline and, at points, treated it like the issue should already be settled. In their framing, if Nolan was seen alive well after the boat left, then the friends could not have been responsible for whatever happened next. Simple. Clean. End of story. But Nancy Grace did not accept that framing, and once you slow the claim down, there are 3 major gaps that keep it from being as final as the attorneys want it to sound. The first problem is the witnesses themselves. We still do not know who they are. Their identities have not been made public, and the attorneys say that is intentional, because people connected to this case have already received serious threats and harassment. That concern should not be dismissed. If witnesses are genuinely afraid of being targeted online, protecting their names can be completely reasonable. Nobody should be pressured into public exposure just because people on social media want answers. But protecting a witness from harassment and proving that witness is reliable are 2 very different things. The fact that we do not know their names means the public also cannot independently evaluate some very basic questions about the sighting. Nancy Grace pushed directly on those questions. How well did these witnesses know Nolan? Had they seen him before? Were they close enough to make a confident identification? Were they drinking that day? How exactly did they know the time was around 6 p.m.? Was it tied to a phone call, a photograph, a receipt, a boat departure, or are they simply estimating after the fact? Those details matter because 6 p.m. is not just a random time in this story. It is the time being used to separate the friend group's departure from Nolan's final known movements. If that time moves by even 30 or 45 minutes, the argument starts to change. And this is where the answers became much less confident than the claim itself. Instead of firm answers, Nancy repeatedly got responses closer to, I believe so, I think so, or I'm not sure. That does not mean the witnesses are wrong, but it does mean the attorneys are asking everyone to accept a level of certainty that they themselves were not able to fully explain on air. If you are going to call a sighting 100% end of story, then the supporting details should be just as strong as the language. Who identified Nolan? How certain were they? What condition were they in? What anchored the time? Those are not unfair questions. They are the exact questions any investigator would want answered. Then came the second gap, and this may be the most important one. Nancy asked whether the two witnesses knew each other and whether they had discussed what they saw before speaking with investigators. The answer was yes, they knew each other. Yes, they were together that day. And when asked whether they had probably talked about the sighting before giving their accounts, the attorney basically admitted, I'm sure they did. That changes the way the claim has to be evaluated. Two witnesses sound powerful because the phrase suggests two separate people independently saw the same thing. But two people who were together, know each other, and discussed the event before giving statements are not necessarily two completely independent sources. That does not automatically make their story unreliable. Friends naturally talk after something unusual happens. They compare what they saw. They ask each other if they remember the same thing. That is normal human behavior. But from an investigative standpoint, it creates a problem because memory is not a perfect recording. People can influence each other without realizing it. One person remembers a shirt color, the other agrees. One person says it was around 6, the other begins anchoring their own memory to that same time. One person remembers where Nolan was standing, and after discussing it, both accounts become more similar. None of that requires dishonesty. It is simply how memory can work. That is why investigators often try to interview witnesses separately as early as possible. They want each person's original memory before the stories begin to merge. So when the attorney admits these two witnesses probably talked beforehand, the public should not automatically hear two witnesses and think that means two completely separate confirmations. It may be two people honestly describing the same event, but it may also be one shared recollection reinforced between them before either gave a formal account. That distinction matters. And then we get to the third gap, the video and photo evidence reportedly supporting the timeline. Nancy asked a very basic question. Is there a confirmed timestamp? When exactly was this footage taken? If the video is being used to show who was on the boat and when the group left Horn Island, then that timing is critical. But again, she did not get a clean answer. One attorney pushed back and said the video was not created by his side, so proving its timestamp was not really his responsibility. In a narrow legal sense, that may be fair. If his clients did not create the footage, he cannot personally authenticate every technical detail. But that answer becomes weaker when the same footage is being used publicly to support the defense timeline. You cannot say a video proves your clients were already gone and then treat the actual time attached to that video like a minor issue. The timestamp is not decoration. It is the entire point. Without a verified time, the footage only shows certain people on a boat at some moment. It does not independently prove whether that moment was 4:30, 5:30, or later. And in this case, those differences matter. Now, none of this means the 6 p.m. sighting is false. That needs to be said clearly. The witnesses could be completely accurate. They may have known Nolan well enough to identify him instantly. They may have had a clear reason for knowing the exact time. Investigators may already have their statements, phone records, photos, or other evidence that confirms everything. The video may already be authenticated privately, even if the attorneys did not discuss that on television. But that is exactly the distinction that keeps getting lost. This could be completely true is not the same thing as this has been proven beyond question. And when the attorney uses language like 100% end of story, he is claiming the second standard while publicly showing only part of the first. So right now, 3 questions still sit underneath the entire 6 p.m. defense. Who exactly saw Nolan, and how strong was their identification? Were those 2 accounts truly independent before the witnesses compared memories? And is the timeline supported by verified digital evidence, especially a confirmed timestamp? Until those 3 things are clear, this sighting remains important. It may eventually become one of the strongest pieces of evidence in the case. It may completely support the friend group's account. But right now, based on what has actually been explained publicly, it is not the clean end of story moment the attorneys want people to believe it is. It is a serious claim with serious unanswered questions. And those questions matter because if Nolan truly was alive at 6 p.m., then investigators need to know exactly who saw him, exactly where he was, and exactly what happened after that. That is not a side issue. That could define the entire final timeline. Now watch what happens when the friend group's latest version gets compared with the versions that came before it. Because this is where the story gets more complicated. This is not about proving anyone guilty, and it is not about turning every inconsistency into evidence of wrongdoing. People remember stressful events differently. Details change. Timelines get cleaned up after people have had weeks to think about what happened. But when the same group keeps telling the same story publicly, eventually those versions have to be placed side by side. And when they are, some details do not line up as comfortably as they should. Start with the phones. The phones. In the newest account, the number is very specific. Nolan left his phone on the boat along with 5 other people who also left theirs behind. That gives us 6 phones total. But earlier in this case, another number circulated. Roughly 15 phones left on the boat, reportedly sitting around the dashboard area. 6 phones and 15 phones are not remotely the same thing. That is not someone forgetting whether there were 6 or 7. We are talking about one version describing more than twice as many phones as the other. Now we have to be careful here. Neither number has been independently confirmed publicly. We do not know whether the earlier 15 phone figure was exaggerated somewhere along the chain, misunderstood by someone repeating it, or whether the newer number is simply describing a smaller group of phones in a different location. There may be an explanation, but until someone provides one, the contradiction remains. If the question is simply, how many phones were left behind that day? Both numbers cannot be accurate at the same time. And why does that matter? Because Nolan leaving his phone behind has become a major part of this case. It affects what he could do after the group left. It affects whether he could call someone, arrange another ride, use GPS, contact his family, or reach anyone if something went wrong. So when the number of phones surrounding that decision changes this much, it is not just a random detail about what was sitting on a boat. It touches one of the biggest unanswered questions in Nolan's final hours. Why his phone stayed behind at all. Then we get to what happened when Nolan's family came looking for the phone and his keys. Warren's current description is very calm. According to him, there was never really an issue. The handoff was quick. He gave them the keys. It did not even take 30 seconds. Nothing dramatic. But then listen to everything else being described around that same night. A tense phone call. Multiple people arriving at the property, reports of people banging on doors, people looking around or searching near a friend's boat, tensions high enough that police were eventually called. Officers reportedly showed up around 2 a.m. and removed people from the property. Those details do not sound like an ordinary, peaceful exchange. Now, Warren could still be telling the truth when he says the actual moment he handed over the keys was quick. Maybe that specific interaction really took less than 30 seconds. But that is different from saying there was never an issue. The handoff may have been simple, while everything surrounding it was extremely tense. And that distinction matters because minimizing the entire encounter makes it sound very different from the broader event being described. That does not mean Warren is deliberately hiding something. People often describe events from their own perspective. He may genuinely remember his part of the interaction as simple. But when we are analyzing credibility, we have to look beyond how someone labels an event and compare that label with what actually happened around it. No issue is hard to square with police showing up at 2 a.m. Then comes the phone detail that deserves even more attention. Warren says he told Christine during their very first conversation that Nolan had left his phone with the group. His version is direct. He says he told her that Nolan left it on the boat with them. If that happened exactly the way Warren now remembers it, then an obvious question follows. Why did Christine later need Life 360 to track down the phone? If she already knew Warren had it and already knew the phone had been left behind, then using a location tracking app to discover where the device was seems unnecessary. She could simply have gone to the place Warren told her the phone was located or asked him directly where to collect it. Again, there are innocent explanations. Christine may have been overwhelmed and wanted to verify the phone's exact location herself. Warren may have told her Nolan left the phone behind without clearly explaining where it had ended up. There may have been confusion over whether the phone was still on the boat, at someone's house, or somewhere else. A frantic conversation during a missing person situation is not going to sound like a perfectly organized police interview, and memory also changes with time. Warren may remember telling Christine everything clearly because today he knows exactly what the important details were, but in the actual moment, the conversation may have been much more scattered. That is normal. The problem is not that an imperfect conversation happened. The problem is that the version being told now sounds extremely clean, while the actions taken afterwards suggest the information may not have been nearly as clear in real time. And this is where another layer enters the picture, because not every fact in this case points towards suspicion. A veteran prosecutor who has worked homicide cases looked at the same situation and raised an argument that cuts strongly in the opposite direction. His first point is simple. There has been no arrest. Despite all the attention, all the theories, and all the public pressure, authorities have not publicly moved to arrest Warren or the other young men. His second point is that there has been no public official finding that Nolan's death was a homicide. That does not mean investigators are finished. It does not mean every question has been answered. But there is still an important difference between the suspicions being debated online and what law enforcement has actually established publicly. Then comes his third point, and this one may be the most interesting. These young men are still talking. They continue appearing publicly. They continue giving interviews, and more importantly, they are doing it with attorneys present. From a defense lawyer's perspective, public interviews create risk. Every new statement can be compared with an old statement. Every sentence can become evidence. Every small contradiction can be replayed later. If an attorney believes a client is facing serious criminal exposure, the safest advice is often very simple: stop talking. So the prosecutor's argument is that the fact these lawyers are still allowing their clients to speak publicly may tell us something about how confident they are behind the scenes. That is not proof that the young men have been cleared. Attorneys can make strategic decisions for many reasons, but it is still a real point that deserves to be weighed alongside the inconsistencies, and that is where this case becomes harder than either side wants it to be. On one hand, you have details that deserve real scrutiny. 6 phones versus around 15. A supposedly simple exchange surrounded by enough conflict that police became involved. Warren saying Christine already knew he had Nolan's phone while Christine still used Life 360 to locate it. Those are real questions. But on the other hand, you also have real procedural facts. No arrest, no public homicide finding, and attorneys continuing to allow their clients to sit in front of cameras and answer questions rather than telling them to disappear from public view completely. Those facts matter too. One side does not automatically erase the other. You can believe the friend group story contains inconsistencies without deciding those inconsistencies prove a crime, and you can recognize that the current legal posture looks less alarming than the online theories suggest without pretending every unanswered question has disappeared. That is the point people keep skipping. This case should not be reduced to they changed details so they must be guilty, but it also should not be reduced to nobody has been arrested, so stop asking questions. Neither standard is good enough. The retellings still need to be tested against phone data, timestamps, witness statements, physical evidence, and whatever investigators have collected privately. Because eventually, the question will not be whether Warren sounded convincing in an interview or whether somebody online found an inconsistency. The question will be whether the evidence supports the timeline. And until that happens, both realities remain on the table. Parts of the story have shifted in ways worth questioning, while the actual investigation has still not publicly moved toward accusing these young men of causing Nolan's death. That tension is not something we should force into an easy conclusion. It is exactly what still has to be resolved. This is the moment the interview gets much more uncomfortable, because Nancy Grace stops dealing with broad theories and starts asking about things that can actually be checked. Not feelings, not assumptions, not who sounds convincing. Specific actions, specific timelines, and specific pieces of evidence. And one of the first things that comes under that pressure is Warren's decision to call the Coast Guard. Warren has repeatedly pointed to that call as one of the strongest examples that he cared about Nolan and acted when he realized something might be wrong. His position is basically this: once concern became serious, he called for help. On its face, that sounds responsible. But a commentator challenged that explanation by pointing to something that happened earlier the same day. When the group's boat was reportedly taking on water, Coast Guard assistance was offered, and the group declined because a private tow was already coming. Hours later, Warren called the Coast Guard specifically because Nolan had not returned. At first, that can sound like a contradiction. Why turn down Coast Guard help when your own boat is in trouble, then call them later for someone you believed had simply stayed behind to catch another ride? That is the question being raised. But once the circumstances are separated, the comparison becomes less simple than it first appears. Earlier in the afternoon, the boat problem had a known cause. There were people physically on the boat, they were aware of the mechanical issue, they had communication, and most importantly, a private tow was reportedly already responding. Declining additional Coast Guard assistance in that situation does not necessarily mean they were careless. It could simply mean they believed the problem was already being handled. Later that night, the situation was completely different. Nolan was not physically with them. Hours had passed, there was no confirmed contact from him. Darkness was setting in. The location involved open water and a remote barrier island, and nobody could say with certainty where he was. Those are very different circumstances. Calling the Coast Guard in that situation could have been exactly what a worried friend should do. So, the stronger question is not really why Warren accepted Coast Guard help in one situation and declined it in another. The stronger question is what he believed had happened to Nolan when he made that call. The group's account has been that Nolan stayed on the island because he planned to leave with someone else. If that was genuinely what they believed, then the first obvious question would be, who was that person, and did Nolan actually leave with them? That brings us directly to Katie. Warren has said he did not speak with Katie until later. The attorneys have explained that the group did not already have her direct contact information and had to work through mutual friends to reach her. If that is true, then it weakens the argument that Warren should simply have called Katie before contacting the Coast Guard. You cannot immediately call someone whose number you do not have. But that explanation creates another issue, because the attorneys themselves did not describe the Katie connection consistently. One attorney said very plainly they did not know Katie. That sounds absolute. But another attorney explained that the group was able to reach out through mutual friends, get her contact information, and communicate with her. Those statements can both technically be true. You can know who someone is without personally knowing them. You can have mutual friends with someone you have never met. That is normal, but this is where the wording becomes important. They did not know Katie leaves the audience with the impression that she was essentially a stranger completely outside their social circle. They reached her quickly through mutual friends, described something more connected. Not necessarily close, but connected enough that a path to her existed. That does not prove anyone lied. It may simply mean the attorney was using know in the narrow sense of personally knowing her. But that is also the pattern that starts appearing throughout this interview. Broad, clean statements are made first. Then, when Nancy pushes on the details, narrower explanations appear. The polygraph discussion is another example. At one point, a public commentator claimed that most of the group had taken and passed what was described as a polygraph-type examination. That kind of claim carries weight with viewers because it sounds like independent proof that the friends cooperated and passed some kind of credibility test. Then their attorney said directly that his clients had not taken polygraphs. That is not a small wording difference. Either they took polygraphs or they did not. The attorney later explained that other people connected to the case may have taken a voice stress analysis test instead. And that distinction matters. A voice stress analysis is not the same thing as a traditional polygraph. They are different methods, and casually blending the two can make the level of testing sound stronger or more formal than it really was. Maybe this was innocent confusion. Maybe someone earlier used polygraph as a loose label for any lie detection style test. That happens. But if the testing claim is being used publicly to support credibility, then people deserve to know exactly what test was given, who took it, and what the results actually were. Again, this does not prove wrongdoing. It shows how easily a simple talking point can become more complicated once the exact details are checked. Then Nancy reaches what may be the most important unresolved issue in the entire discussion: Nolan's phone. According to what was said in the interview, more than a month after Nolan's death, his phone still had not been formally turned over for a complete investigative examination. If accurate at that point in time, that is a major issue because the phone could potentially answer questions that human memory cannot. It may contain location history, messages, calls, app activity, photos, videos, Snapchat information, search history, connections to other devices. It may help establish where the phone was, when it moved, and what was happening around the final hours before Nolan disappeared. And here's where the transparency argument cuts in both directions. The friend group's attorneys repeatedly say they want all the evidence examined. Their message is basically, get everything. Look at everything. We have nothing to hide. That sounds strong, but by their own account, Nolan's phone was no longer in their possession. The family had recovered it. That means the question of why investigators did not yet have the phone cannot simply be aimed at Warren or the friends. According to the account being discussed, Nolan's family used Life 360 to locate the device and recovered it. Christine has also publicly talked about looking through parts of the phone herself, including checking Snapchat because she believed some content was missing. That is completely understandable from a human point of view. A mother trying to understand what happened to her son is not going to think like an evidence technician. She is going to look for answers wherever she can find them. But from an investigative standpoint, it creates a fair question. If the phone was believed to contain some of the most important information in the case, why had a full forensic handoff not happened sooner? There may be completely innocent reasons. The family's attorneys may have wanted independent forensic experts to examine the device first. They may have been concerned about preserving data properly. They may have been waiting for legal guidance on how to hand it over. They may have wanted copies made before surrendering physical custody. And grief itself can slow down decisions that seem obvious to people looking in from the outside. All of those explanations are possible, but the friend group's attorneys do not get a complete pass either. If their position is truly, we want all the evidence, then that standard should include Nolan's phone, even if the phone was sitting with the other side. That is where Nancy's questioning becomes uncomfortable for everyone. Once the conversation moves away from defending individual people and toward the evidence itself, the question becomes much simpler. Who has the phone? Who has examined it? What has been preserved? And when will investigators have a complete forensic record? Those questions matter more than television arguments because digital evidence does not care which side sounds more convincing. A verified timestamp does not care who has a better lawyer. Location data does not care which version is more popular online. And that is really the deeper issue running through this entire interview. The Coast Guard call has context that makes it less suspicious than it first sounds. The Katie issue may have an innocent explanation, but the attorney's wording created unnecessary confusion. The polygraph claim may simply be a mix-up between different types of testing, but that still matters when it is used to support credibility. And the phone raises a transparency question that reaches both sides instead of only one. That is why this interview does not give us one clean villain or one clean answer. What it gives us is a pattern of claims that sound simple until somebody asks for the exact timeline, the exact wording, the exact test, or the exact piece of digital evidence. And until those details are independently verified, nobody should be calling any part of this case end of story. The memories can conflict, the attorneys can argue, commentators can interpret the same facts differently. But eventually, the digital evidence has to do what the interviews cannot: show what actually happened and when.